Maybe not so
Humor.
much with Guinness, but a lot of the brands that have used the Pratfall Effect, people like VW in its heyday, Buckley's, the amazing cough syrup in Canada. Now, they are very humorous campaigns, and it often comes by emphasizing that weakness. So if people aren't familiar with the Buckley's campaign, massive in Canada, not very well known outside, they in 1990, I think it was around then, they decided after years of just bland advertising to go all in on an idea. It tastes awful and it works. And over the next few years, they went from being a tiny player in the cough syrup market to the number one. Didn't increase the spend, but they massively now outsell, the giant multinational brands.
Richard, thank you for accepting the invite and welcome to A Glass of Marketing. The concept is pretty simple. We usually have a glass and we talk about marketing, of course, personal and professional growth. But before getting started, what are you drinking today?
I have got Guinness 00. So I'm trying to have a dryish January. And as alcohol-free beers go, I think Guinness
Nice.
Zero is incomparable. Like a lot of the others, the versions don't quite taste like the proper stuff. Whereas to me, Guinness 00 or Guinness, it's interchangeable. So yeah, big fan.
No, nice. Guinness is one of my favorite beers, to be honest. And it makes sense because it has a very strong flavor. So you don't really drink it because of the alcohol. I mean, the taste is there anyway. So, right.
Yeah, I think you're right. Probably the hardest thing to have is a really good 00 lager because it doesn't taste
Yeah.
it much, and a slight imperfection I think is really noticeable. Whereas, yeah, you're probably right, because Guinness is quite flavorful. It might mask a few things.
I've noticed, like, walking around London, that a lot of brands during dry January, they advertising like alcohol-free beers. Do you think it's also like a way to advertise the overall brand with, using the alcohol-free beer to advertise their alcoholic beers during dry January?
So, I mean, that's a great question. I think people are a lot less logical and rational in terms of their response to ads than maybe we think as marketers. We might come on to it later, but there's a brilliant idea called the halo effect, which essentially says that if a person or a product has one standout feature, like let's say a person is really good looking or they're amazingly intelligent, that attribute will affect the audience's interpretation of even unrelated metrics. So if you come across someone who's wonderfully beautiful, it's not just their beauty that you'll respond to. You'll also assume they're a kinder person, a nicer person, a more intelligent person. So that's called the halo effect. It's this idea that we don't evaluate a brand or a person's individual attributes independently. One standout factor will affect all the others. So I think you're right. If you do a brilliant piece of witty 00 advertising, though those attributes won't be literally stuck with the sub brand in question. They'll spread out. So I think you're right there.
So for my audience, by the way, thank you for accepting the invite and cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.
So for my audience, as you can tell, how we just started, Richard is an expert in using behavioral science to improve marketing. And then we will get into it. So what's behavioral science? And you are the author of two popular books. The first one is The Choice Factory. You wrote it in 2018, where you explore 25 behavioral biases that impact marketing. And then your latest book is The Illusion of Choice, so 2023, where you actually focus on 16 and half. Curious about the half.
Yeah.
psychological biases that shape the way we buy. So I think your main focus is making complex marketing ideas simple and practical for marketers, right? Also because I know you come from agency side, so we can talk about it. So you actually don't want to just talk about theory. You want to talk about practical theory. So how do you apply theory? So yeah, thank you for accepting the invite. And maybe the first question here is, what's behavioral science?
Yeah, great question. Um, so it's nothing complicated. It's what people used to call psychology. So behavioral science is the study of how to effectively change behavior. And it's the study of what actually influences people rather than what they claim influences them. And those two things are often very, very different. Um, I would say one of the themes of behavioral science is a skepticism towards claim data. There's generally a belief amongst psychologists and behavioral scientists that people don't have full introspective insight into their own motivations. So if you ask someone why they buy a particular lager, they'll give you lots of plausible post-rationalizations, but many of those arguments will be misleading. Um, if there is a broad thing to this topic, it's summed up very well by a wonderful psychologist called Susan Fiske, and she describes people as cognitive misers. So what she means by that is, for most of our evolutionary history, energy has been a scarce resource, and thinking is energy intensive, it's effortful. So we have evolved as a species to ration deep considered thought. And for most of our decisions through the day, whether it's personal or professional or consumer, most decisions are not made in a labored, considered, deeply thought through way, because that would be wasteful of energy. Most decisions are made in a fast, snap way. And the way that we make those snap decisions is to use what psychologists call heuristics. These are simple rules of thumb that allow people to make a quick decision. So maybe pick the middle option or pick the most popular option. Those would be heuristics. So they allow you to choose quickly. And what's interesting is all these little rules of thumb are prone to biases. So essentially, if you know about the biases when you're designing your comms, when you're creating your products, you can work with human nature rather than against it. And that always makes for a more effective intervention.
So
So that,
at
in
the
a
end of the
nutshell,
day,
is what behavioral science is.
at the
Mm.
end of the day, you are a psychologist working for a marketer, essentially.
So behavioral economics is often described as the overlap of economics and psychology. I think that would be a fair description as well, and a pithier one, to be fair.
Yeah, no, totally interesting. I mean, I work in marketing, and I started working in marketing because I really loved psychology, a little bit of philosophy as well, and then I loved like creativity and marketing. And so I think, like what you're actually doing is putting it together, right? Is like trying to understand people in order to then find shortcuts and increase sales. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about increasing sales here, right?
Yeah, that's the behavior change that a marketer's interested in. I mean, what our job really boils down to is getting people to pay a premium, picking our brand over a competitor, and buying more of our range. And every single one of those core roles that we have as marketer, and they're all about behavior change. And we literally work in the business of behavior change. So I think it's slightly crazy that as a discipline, we don't spend far more time thinking about behavioral science, because all behavioral science is 130 years of experiments in what makes for effective behavior change. This is as relevant a topic as you could get for marketing.
Most of it should be also data driven, right? Because I think the point you make is like it's right to say, okay, people prefer, I don't know, the middle choice, or people prefer, scarcity or whatever, but then you need to prove it right. I had my previous episode is with Byron Sharp, right? And
Yeah.
the point he's making is that, of course, marketers can talk about, theories, feelings, whatever, but then you need to prove it, right? So we need data there.
Yes, and I would phrase it slightly different, but I broadly agree with that. What you don't want, and what marketers often do, is have logically elegant and beautiful theories, and think that is enough. You've got to put everything to the test. And the thing I love about behavioral science is nothing is based just on logic alone. Nothing is based on someone's authority. Everything has to be proven. But what makes behavioral science really interesting is the way that things get proven. You know, this isn't it's not acceptable to send out just a survey and ask people directly why they buy things. Okay? As I mentioned at the beginning, most psychologists would be deeply skeptical about that direct claim data from a survey or a focus group. And the argument is people do not know their own motivations. There's an amazing psychologist called Timothy Wilson. He's at the University of Virginia. And one of his books is entitled Strangers to Ourselves. And it's this idea that we don't know why we do things, but we're very good at coming up with plausible rationalizations when we're put on the spot. But the follow-on of Wilson's idea is that, well, if people don't know why they do things, questioning them will send you off in the wrong direction. What you need to do instead is set up simple test and control experiments in a naturalistic as setting as possible. And that will get you much, much closer to the truth.
So what's the type of experiments you've been using, or you've been using in your books? Probably, I guess, experiments from other people. Is it like mainly observation? I guess, right? How do you focus groups?
So maybe give you an example.
Yeah.
So rather than observation, which I think is more ethnography, and rather than surveys and focus groups, which is more standard market research techniques, psychologists would run what they call field experiments. So I'll give you a classic, very, very well-known example, but it kind of proves the point quite nicely. So there is a really well-known idea called social proof. So I write about this in the Choice Factory. And it's the idea that if you can convince someone that your product is popular, you will make your product more appealing and more people will buy it. So there's a lovely 2008 study from Robert Cialdini that tests this. And I think his technique is pretty representative. So he finds a hotel and persuades that hotel chain to let him alter the messages that are running in guest rooms. So one randomly selected set of rooms has the control message. Please reuse the towel, it's good for the environment. 35% of people do so. And then another set of randomly selected rooms get a different door hanger message that uses social proof. So they get rid of the rational reasons, they get rid of the mention of the environment, and now the message says, please reuse your towel. Most guests who've stayed in this room have done so. And what Cialdini finds is there is a 40% improvement in towel reuse. You're now up to 49% of people reusing the towels. So what he's done is he's found a naturalistic setting. He's done this in a hotel, not in a lab. Yeah. He's then tested the intervention without people knowing they're in an experiment. No one's told that the next door room has a different message. Cialdini works with the cleaners, and they tell him whether people reuse their towels or not. So it's this observed data rather than claimed data. And then I think the final bit, this thing that I've been mentioning again and again about claims being misleading, Cialdini tests that as well. So he does his simple A/B test, in effect, his field experiment. But then he follows up with a more standard market research technique. He sends out a survey to a new group of participants. And he says, look, imagine you were in a hotel and imagine you saw these messages. What would influence you? And most people claim that it would be the environmental message. What people say motivates them is completely different from what actually happened in reality. So that study is really a bit of a microcosm for behavioural science. Observed data, not claimed data. And
so then in these cases, who is right? Like if I was making two different studies, right? And they are, of course, proving two different things. Who is right? How does it work? Yeah.
Think what they're proving. The survey proves what people say. Yeah. The hotel study proves what they do. Now, 99% of situations, you're interested in what people do. I don't care if you say that you're going to give Astro 10 £1 million, you're going to buy 10,000 copies of my book. I'm much more interested in what you actually do. You go to Amazon and buy a copy. It's the behavioural data that is so much more powerful. There
No,
might be
it's
some
very
rare circumstances.
interesting,
Hmm.
and the reason why I'm asking is because I mean, working in performance marketing in digital marketing, I started my career in paid media. I always say that every paid media campaign is not just a performance marketing campaign. So you're not just driving clicks, impressions, or whatever, but it's also a market research campaign.
I love
Because
that.
eventually,
Hmm.
if you're able to send two different messages, and people don't know what they're receiving, right? So it's very similar to the hotel experiment. If you send like a meta ads campaign, right, to two
Yeah.
different audiences, and you ask them, so you split them 50-50, right? And same demographic, same interest, right? And you ask them, and you send them two different messages, then so my question is it similar to the hotel experiment?
It's really similar. It's really similar. The only thing that I would say is slightly different, and I might be, you know, um, talk about digital marketing slightly unfairly, but I think an awful lot of A/B testing in digital marketing is trying to understand which of the final creatives or messaging is most powerful. The slight difference with the Cialdini study is he's kind of taking it one step back. So rather than test whether blue versus red works or a picture of a cat beats a dog or, you know, 20% off is better than 10% off, what he's doing in his test is thinking, well, what is the underlying driver that changes people's behavior? What is the broad lever? His study shows that social proof is powerful. And then the great thing there is that once you've realized that, then I think you do the more standard A/B testing. You think, well, how do we convey social proof? Because there are dozens upon dozens of ways of saying that you're popular. So I completely agree with you that the A/B testing that digital marketers do again and again is very similar to the field experiments that behavioral scientists do. The only slight difference might be the type of things people test. And I would argue there is a really big opportunity for digital marketers to test the underlying drivers more regularly. Because if you are just testing campaign creative, you've got a shelf life of, say, three or
Yeah,
six
I think
months.
it's all about how you frame it, right? So if
Mm,
how you build your hypothesis. So if you build your hypothesis in a way that you want to test what's behind the choice, what's behind the click, and it's not just about the click, then I think it makes it pretty fair, right? So no, it's very interesting. By the way, so the idea here is you have two books, the Choice Factory and the Illusion of Choice. So we don't have time to
yeah.
go through the 41 and a half biases. So
Yeah.
I will try to pick a few per each book and we can go through those. Yeah. How
Fine.
does it
Yeah.
sound? Sounds good.
That sounds very good.
So the first one is the Choice Factory. So you quickly spoke about the social proof. Maybe can you quickly touch on it, and
Yeah.
then can we move
S-
into the distinctiveness? Maybe.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So social proof. The
Yeah.
Cialdini study covers the broad idea. Make yourself make whatever behavior you want to encourage look like it's popular. It will become more popular still. You mentioned earlier though about creativity, and I think that's a really interesting area to think about social proof, because what most marketers do with social proof is apply it in quite a pedestrian way. They go out and say, we sold 1 million cans of beer this month, or we are Britain's most popular lager. Now, that's going to be effective. We know from Cialdini and many other studies that stressing popularity works. But with all these studies, they are most powerful when they are applied with a dash of creativity. So, the best way I think of using social proof is to imply it rather than directly state it. Because if you go out and say you sell 1 million units or you're very, very popular, people might be skeptical. But if you can design your product in a way that um, makes it much more noticeable, and you can create a product that essentially makes people feel they've come to their own conclusion about its popularity, then you're harnessing this bias much more powerfully. Now that all might sound a little bit woolly and abstract, so I'll give you a very specific example. Gin and tonic. Gordon's gin. You buy your gin. It comes in a plain glass. You walk away from the bar, and then no one knows what you're drinking. They allow their consumption to be private and invisible. Now compare it to Hendrix. Hendrix launched, they make a big fanfare about their served over cucumber. So someone gets a Hendrix at the bar, even if it's not in a branded glass, it's over cucumber. They walk away from the bar. Everyone can easily spot that's a Hendrix. So even if in reality Hendrix is selling a tenth of Gordon's, it looks like it's popular, and therefore it taps into social proof, and you get this virtuous circle of ever increasing popularity. So the argument here, as a marketer, is think, can people easily spot when my product's being consumed? And if you're allowing your consumption or usership to be hidden away, you've got to think about how you can make it more noticeable, how you can make it more public. If you do it, I think you're creatively tapping
So you're
into
saying
one
social
of these
proof is
biases.
linked to distinctiveness then, right? Because I mean, you make it
Yeah,
distinctive and it's easier to make people kind of like it because they notice that everyone is using it, essentially.
yeah. So social proof is the idea we copy what others do. We are a herd species, we're a social animal. One of the ways to convey popularity is to say you're popular. But I think the cleverer way is to let people come to their own conclusions, to be noticeable. And then that leads on to distinctiveness. The way that people are hardwired is we are hardwired to spot what's distinctive. So absolutely. But it's not just distinctiveness. Think of a far more mundane example. Go back to COVID. You want people to know lots of other people have been vaccinated as a government. So what some countries did was, as people come out of their vaccination centre, they're given a little sticky badge. You know, I've had my vaccine. That's not particularly distinctive. It's not particularly a great creative leap, but it is turning a behaviour that would have previously been invisible into something that is noticeable. So distinctiveness, I think, is one tactic to noticeability. There are others available.
Oh, it's interesting, and I think social proof, I think, has been used on social media. For example, I was thinking about it while you were talking. I think it's been using on social media. For example, when people now it's a little bit harder, but like I think there was a point where a lot of people were buying followers, for example, like likes, views, whatever, right? And it's funny how if you have a great piece of content, so of course quality first. You need to have a good piece of content, otherwise people can tell, that is not it doesn't deserve that fake visibility or followers or whatever. But it's interesting, and I never run an experiment, but it's interesting how something with higher followers, higher views looks more like legit than something with lower views. And
Yeah.
I mean, as a marketer, I see those things happening very often. And then, of course, there are ways to understand if it's real or not. But it's interesting because then you get a point where, of course, that has a lot of views, a lot of followers, but then, of course, because of the social proof, then it starts getting real followers and real views. Same
Yeah.
with music. I have some friends that work in the music industries, and you will be surprised how many, artists buy, views and followers. But the interesting thing is that the music is great. The thing is, the moment you have a certain level of, plays, then it makes it more legit, and people start listening to it for real. So it's
Yeah.
interesting.
I mean, think of it from
Fake it
the
until you
listeners.
make it, essentially.
Yeah, I like that. Think of it from the listener's perspective. You've got a scarce resource, your time. So you've got to work out where to apportion that. You can't read everything, you can't listen to everything. And if you see a LinkedIn post has 500 retweets, you're going to think to yourself, well, this is probably going to be quite good because 500 people, independent, supposedly neutral people, have thought it was good enough to retweet. And it's that neutrality of recommendation that makes social proof more powerful than advertising often. Because if a big brand says they're amazing, the natural reaction is to think, well, they would say that. That's cheap talk. Why should I listen to it? They have a profit motive. Of course they're going to say they're amazing. But if independent, neutral people have picked the product or they've retweeted the article Well, presumably they are just out there trying to maximize their own benefit. This is a more valuable signal than someone's own claim. Um, you mentioned music. There are studies done by Duncan Watts about 10 or 15 years ago where he showed what you've said is proven in an experimental setting. He did a lovely study where he got people to listen to music, and this is in the early days of iTunes when you downloaded individual songs. You listen to like 20 songs, and then at the end, one of your rewards was you can have 4 or 5 of these songs for free. You pick whichever ones you want. And what Watts did was sometimes have no mention of what other people had picked. Sometimes he told the audience what other people had picked, and then sneakily and a little bit naughtily, sometimes he flipped the order. So the least popular stuff was labeled as the most popular. And what he saw was that there was a very clear pattern. You know, if you labeled something as highly popular, people would rate it higher, they're more likely to download it. So exactly the same thing will be rated better if people think it's popular. That's
Yeah, because
undoubtedly
it's a shortcut. People want what the others already got, not because they just want to kind of look like the others, but maybe because they say, "Of if is in the best selling, is in the top 5." It's the same at the restaurant, I guess, right? When you have the best selling, I don't know, dishes, people are gonna get for those. Also because you wanna, I mean, in my opinion, I mean, I usually do it, but just because I wanna know how the others are picking things, right? And I might be like, oh wow, people taste is disgusting. But
Yeah,
usually
yeah,
it's also because like you trust the owner of the restaurant. You're like, okay, if you focus more on these 5 dishes, it means that they good, right? So I would rather maybe the ingredients are more fresh as well, right? So there are
yeah, yeah.
different ways
I
to
mean,
explain that.
restaurants, there's a study by Fang at Duke University who's shown that, yeah, absolutely. If you have a restaurant menu and it says chef's recommendation, that dish will be a little bit more popular than with no message. But if you have a restaurant using social proof, get rid of chef's recommendation and put most popular dish, it will sell even more. So it's one of these biases. We've seen it in hotels, we've discussed it in music, in restaurants. It works again and again and again. So whatever brief you have, you should at least actively consider social proof. Now, you might for some reason think, well, it's not right for this, but it's such a repeatedly powerful bias. You should at least consider it, I think, on pretty much every brief.
What about then the second one, being distinctive? I mean, to me, sounds pretty clear because I feel like I tell you what I think first, because in this digital marketing, like world where everyone is advertising, there is a lot of quantity. I gave a couple of presentations in the previous months where I was saying that to make sure, I call it the digital maids, and I said people today are lost. Like the consumer is lost because it's in a maids, a lot of products for the same need, so it's easy to get lost. So I said the easy way to get people out of the digital maids is, of course, having always on campaigns, because you want to make sure that people remember you. Then full funnel campaigns, because you want to make sure that you build awareness, engagement, and conversion at the same time. And you take people from top to bottom continuously, because I don't even think it's a funnel phase anymore, it's a circle shape. So of course you want people to kind of get back to it at some point. And then you want to be opti-channel, so choosing the optimum channel for you and for your consumer. And then I always say the message needs to be distinctive, because my feeling is a lot of brands, because today it's very easy to be creative, like it's very cheap as well. Like with AI, all the tools we have, it's very easy to change the message every hour, or even personalize the message per audience, which is something that a lot of people do. I believe sometimes being very distinctive, I don't know, I usually take the example of Red Bull. Red Bull gives you wings in every language, in every country. Of course, they adapt it to the environment, like it's university or it's, sport or whatever. But I really like how they say, I give you wings. So it's very distinctive. And I think it's powerful because it helps people like remember in the world of quantity. What's your take on that?
Yeah. I think Red Bull are a fantastic brand. I think I like that slogan for a slightly different reason. Distinctive might be part of it, but I think there's something else going on. So most brands would probably say, imagine a more average, mediocre team put together Red Bulls. They might say Red Bull gives you energy, Red Bull gives you power, Red Bull gives you a buzz. Only the problem with energy, buzz, power, these are abstractions. So what by that I mean they are intangibles that you cannot visualize. The great thing with the Red Bull slogan is it is concrete. It is a thing you can visualize a wing, and there are some wonderful studies that show concrete terms are about 4 times more memorable than abstract terms. So the original study was a 1972 study by Ian Begg. He was at the University of Western Ontario. And for his study, he gets a list of 22 word phrases. 10 of them are abstract, like subtle fault or simple excuse. 10 of them are concrete, white horse, square door. Reads the list out, and then he asks people later on what they can remember. And on average, 9% of the abstractions are remembered, but 36% of the concrete phrases. So there's this massive fourfold difference in memorability. And Begg's explanation is really simple. He says vision's the most powerful of our senses. So if you use language people can visualize, it's sticky. If you use language people can't visualize, it's completely forgettable. So Red Bull, I love it. Yes, it's distinctive, but it's also concrete. And it's that concreteness that's one of the most powerful memory techniques available. A fourfold increase. Most of the stuff we are concerning ourselves on a day-to-day basis is eking out 1% here or 2% there. This is massive. And it is definitely something, going back to distinctiveness, that far more brands can apply. Brands are always talking about things like quality and trust and premiumness. Too abstract. Like, bring it back to that visualizable image when you're putting language together.
I think it's pretty interesting how you say keep it practical as well. Like it's easy when someone is talking about storytelling, being very creative, telling a story, but then keep it practical as well. Like what is it about? And yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
very
Although I've
interesting.
defined concrete as you can picture it, you can visualize it. So
Okay.
I think you're right. That normally makes it more practical. But abstract, you can't visualize. Concrete, you can visualize. I think that's how Begg would have defined.
And then moving to the other one.
So brilliant. So it also fits with my Guinness very nicely,
Okay.
um, because they were an exponent of this, a brilliant exponent. So the pratfall, firstly, the term. So this is a term that's kind of fallen out of common usage, but in the 1960s, it used to mean like a mistake. So the pratfall effect is the idea that we are attracted to people or products that exhibit a flaw. Original experiment was 1966 by a Harvard psychologist called Elliot Aronson. Simple study, recruits a colleague, gets the colleague to take part in a quiz. Aronson gives the colleague all the questions beforehand, so the colleague does amazingly well, gets 92% of the questions right, looks like a genius, wins the quiz by miles. But as the quiz is finishing, the contestant makes a pratfall. He spills a cup of coffee down himself. Now, Aronson has recorded all of this, and he plays the entire audio footage to half of his participants. The other half of the participants get an edited version where they just hear the amazing quiz performance. They don't hear the spillage. And when Aronson questions those two groups about how appealing they find the contestant, there is a clear difference. The group that heard the spillage as well as the great performance, they rate the contestant, I think it's 45% higher than the group who just heard the amazing quiz performance. So Aronson's argument is we are attracted to people who exhibit a flaw. Now, to bring that back to marketing, to bring that back to Guinness, think about their classic slogan. Good things come to those who wait. They are drawing attention to their slowness. That is the flaw in this situation. and that makes them more appealing. The other strengths, and these are things that Aronson didn't look at, but other psychologists have, are you've also, by admitting a flaw, proved your honesty. You've shown that you are prepared to say something that's not obviously in your interest. And that means by admitting the problem about slowness, people believe the quality message more. So there's a second benefit. And then the third and final benefit, and this is where it gets, I think, tricksy, is most people, most of the time, believe life is full of trade-offs. So if you buy something cheap, you sacrifice the quality. There's normally in our mind a sense that you can't, no product is all things to all people. So there's generally a series of trade-offs. And Guinness taps into that wonderfully. They admit it's going to be slow and it's going to take time and you have to wait at the bar. But because of that, we assume the trade-off is it's going to be better quality. And so 3 big things Guinness do. Pratfall Effect, they admit a flaw, they become more appealing. They admit a flaw, they become more trusted. So that's the second bit. And then thirdly, by admitting the right flaw, they emphasize that core strength of quality.
How do you think, I mean, in general, people rely more with that because they believe that perfection doesn't exist? And sometimes when marketing is depicting like perfection is just fake.
I mean, I think that then becomes fascinating. I think there are these 3 reasons. There's believability, there's emphasizing of the alternative characteristic, and then there's this appeal and approachability. So the Pratfall Effect is really about that appeal and approachability. There are some arguments that if you exhibit a flaw, you look like less of a threat. Maybe if you admit a flaw, I'm thinking now very much in one-to-one relations, people don't feel you're looking down on them. That's half the time we dislike people. I think when it moves to advertising, I wonder if maybe some of the strength of admitting a flaw is it is a brilliant way of opening up comic opportunities. Maybe not so
Humor.
much with Guinness, but a lot of the brands that have used the Pratfall Effect, people like VW in its heyday, Buckley's, the amazing cough syrup in Canada. They are very humorous campaigns, and it often comes by emphasizing that weakness. So if people aren't familiar with the Buckley's campaign, massive in Canada, not very well known outside, they, in 1990, I think it was around then, they decided, after years of just bland advertising, to go all in on an idea. It tastes awful and it works. And over the next few years, they went from being a tiny player in the cough syrup market to the number one. Didn't increase the spend, but they massively now outsell, the giant multinational brands. And that's firstly, a brilliant admission of weakness, because if you say you taste foul, the repercussion, I suppose, the trade-off in people's minds is, well, if it's really bad tasting, it's probably really potent. So you get this very important emphasis of potency and efficacy. But what they've done brilliantly is layer on this element of humour. That one of their ads was, the largest bottle we sell is 200 millilitres. Anything bigger would be cruel. They've used this negativity to power very, very humorous advertising.
It's a great point, and I think linking it to humor, I think it's powerful because I'm a big fan of humor, like advertising, but then also stand-up comedy, and it's funny how we find a lot of stand-up comedians now actually advertising, because by making jokes, you kind of sound. You look witty and smarter than the others at some point, because I feel like people that are able to make fun of themselves, they're more powerful because they don't need to be the tallest in the room. Essentially, they already are, so they can look like the shortest, right? It's very interesting. And then the last one, probably on your first book, is the scarcity bias.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the most powerful probably nowadays, because if you think about luxury, right? Watches, like, I don't know, if we look at Rolex, right? You can buy it, like, I think in the past, the obstacle was money, right? If you have the budget, you can buy it. Today, they're building it in a way where, of course, if you have money, you can buy it, but then there are certain models that even if you have money, you can buy because you need to be on a certain list. Same for cars. Like if you want a Ferrari and you have the money tomorrow, I mean, you can still buy it. You can, because Byron Sharp was arguing that I mean, it's not true. If you want to buy it, you can buy it. Of course, you can pay 3 times the price, but you can still buy it. But like at the end of the day, you building extra layers and making it more difficult to buy. So it's kind of scarcity. Why people want what they can have, essentially? Why do we want
Oh,
always what?
I think it's such an interesting one. It's such a powerful bias. And if you look at some of the attempts to rank the influence of biases, for example, there was an analysis of like 2,600, I think, ish e-commerce campaigns by Swarbrick, Jones, and Brown. Most, or if not all, were in the travel industry. But they looked at all the different types. They categorized all these campaigns into different types. And when they looked at the average impacts, the most effective was scarcity, which I think was physical volume. There aren't many hotel rooms left. Next most powerful was social proof. Lots of people have bought this hotel room. And then the third most powerful was what they called urgency, but what I would just call time scarcity. You haven't got long to buy this thing. So I completely agree. Scarcity is a key one. And I think I don't know, there's probably a big evolutionary reason for this. You're more likely to survive if you capitalize on a resource that isn't going to be there tomorrow than focusing on something that's going to be there all the time. This desire for status, again, it is about survival. If you're low status, for most of our human history, you were, probably pretty scared of being excluded by the group or not getting a mate. I think this goes back to the complete hardwiring of human nature. I've had a brilliant example reasonably recently of scarcity, and it's the pineapple. So in Britain, when it's the 17th century, Britain's got a small empire at this stage. Some of the areas, countries controlled by things like Barbados, where they grow pineapples. Now, easy to grow a pineapple in Barbados, but very hard in the 17th century to get it back to Britain without it rotting. So this amazingly tasty fruit was in very, very scarce supply. So the demand for it was off the charts. Now, there is a 1685 painting of Charles II, the king, being presented this tiny little pineapple. He's so excited to get this pineapple. He's got this gigantic painting made of it. They cost so much. They were so in demand. People were so crazed to get them that people would rent them for dinner parties. They couldn't afford to own one because that would be, in our money, tens of thousands of pounds. So they would rent them for the evening and put them, on the table and pretend to be super wealthy. Now, of course, people could say, "Oh, well, wait a minute. This is because the pineapple tastes so nice and there wasn't much else that had that sweetness. It's the product, not the scarcity." But it's not. You look at
No, it's clear.
1840s, steamships, refrigeration are bringing pineapples over 10 a penny. The cost plummets. Everyone could afford them, from the working class to the upper class. And then suddenly the demand from the upper class and the wealthy disappears. They wanted this thing because it was hard to get. We want what's in short
No,
supply.
it's clear, and you see scarcity on, I don't know, like the luxury products as well as the normal products. Like if you look at Nikes, right? Like the normal Nikes, like £150 shoes at retail price, different colorways go for limited edition, and then in the secondary market they get up to, I don't know, £5,000, which is crazy. And probably this is the new luxury, is also like transforming something that is accessible to everyone, not really accessible to everyone, right? So it's
I think you're right to say, look, this isn't just in the realms of Ferraris and Birkin bags. I think you can go even further, than you can take this down to tins of soup or bottles of shampoo. So if I was going to run a promotion for a brand tomorrow, let's say it's 10% off or 20% off, what I would tell that brand to do is apply scarcity and put a little sign on the supermarket or on their e-commerce site saying maximum number you can buy is 3 tins of soup or 6 packets of shampoo. that will make people desire the product more. Because think about it from the shopper's perspective. If you say it's 20% off, people go think, well, I don't know if that's good value. I don't know how much a tin of soup
Oh,
costs. There's
you just
thousands of items in the
panic. Yeah.
supermarket. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
But if you
I have a
say it's
passion for
you can't take as much
clothing.
as you want.
When I see they say on the website, I don't know, this is the last pair of shoes or something, that you just want to buy it. And then sometimes I kind of understand that I'm in this kind of a process. Then I stop and I'm like, yeah, maybe it's not. And maybe if it is, it's fine. Let me
Yeah.
save some money today.
It,
But
yeah.
unconsciously, it works very well. Yeah.
Yes. But so I think you're right. Of always trying to differentiate whether a signal is believed or not. But that's why I like the actual limit of sales. We're not saying buy this shampoo, there aren't many left, or buy this shampoo, it won't be around for long. It's we will not let you buy more than 6. And I've run experiments that show that makes things more appealing. So I did a very, very simple study. 282 people. Half are shown a 12-pack of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, and they are told it costs $18.99. And I think it was 13% thought it was good value. The other half are told 12-pack Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, $18.99, maximum you can buy per trip, 6 cases. And I think it was a 50% increase I think it's like 18 or 19% it got up to in terms of people think it's good value. I love it because it's a costless intervention, but because it is meaningful, because it's genuinely not letting people buy as much as they want, people take it seriously. And the body language of restricting sales is this must be either such a good deal, the retailer's worried it's going to sell out, or such a good deal, it's actually losing the brand money. So if I was a brand, I'll be trying that tomorrow.
Very clear, Richard. Thank you for that. And then moving quickly into the
Mm.
illusion of choice, I picked a few. Maybe the first one is the peak end. What is the peak end rule?
So the Pekin rule is an idea that came from Daniel Kahneman and Donald Radermeyer. Kahneman's the more famous of the two. He won the Nobel Prize for economics back in 2002. And they did a whole series of experiments in the early 90s, I think about 1993, maybe the first one. And what they did was get people to undertake an event, and then later on, some people who went through the classic one is they get 600 people who are genuinely going into a colonoscopy. So this is a painful medical procedure. And everyone that goes into the operating theatre is given a handheld device. Device buzzes every minute. And when the device buzzes, the patient has to turn a dial on the device to say how much pain they're in. So they got 15 ratings, in-moment ratings from what they call the experiencing self, because an operation lasts about a quarter of an hour. They then wait till the patient leaves. They get another retrospective rating. They wait another 2 months and they get another retrospective rating about the operation. So now they've got 15 in-moment ratings and 2 retrospective ratings. And before they did the study, most people believe the 2 sets of numbers should be broadly similar. But that's not the case. What people experienced at the time was only a very, very rough guide to what people remembered. Now, the average pain people experienced was a pretty poor guide to people's memory. What was a much better guide, and this is why it's called the peak end rule, were 2 moments. The peak moment, so it could be in other circumstances the best moment of an experience, but in the operation it was the worst moment, the most painful moment. And one bad moment really changed people's memory. And the second thing that had a particularly powerful effect on people's memory was the final moment of the experience. So they call this the peak end rule. And it's the
So
argument
people
that
remember the start of the experience and the end of the experience, essentially. Those
no,
two
so
peaks.
their argument is the peak. The peak's slight difference, not the beginning. It is the best or worst moment. It's what's the most extreme feeling. So in our podcast, we've done, let's say we do an hour. The things, if you go and reached out to all those listeners a week later and you said, what can you remember? They'll probably remember the thing we discussed at the end and then the single most interesting thing. That's the peak end rule. And it's something marketers don't generally apply. Marketers, like I think you were saying, most people focus on making a good first impression. The psychologists would say that's important, but in terms of memory, it's how you end an experience that is far more powerful.
So how would you apply it in, I don't know, hospitality,
Okay,
for example?
hospitality. Glad you said hospitality. I don't think I include this in either books. I came across it later, but there's a lovely example from 11 Madison Park. So this is a 3 Michelin star restaurant in America. 2017, it was voted the world's best restaurant. And what was quite unique was the two people who went up to collect that award were the chef, as you'd expect, but also the front of house. It had been set up as a restaurant to give equal importance to service as food. And the man behind the service was someone called I think it's called Guidara, Guidara, wrote a brilliant book called Unreasonable Hospitality. And throughout this book, he keeps on talking about what is essentially the peak end rule. So, for example, he says one of the things they did was give people a wine pairing. Say $15, you get 5 wines to go with your 5 courses. Now, in the book, he says what most um, what most sommeliers would do was say, okay, I've got a $115 budget. I will spend roughly $23 in each of those wines. What Guadara said is, well, we're not going to do that. We will spend roughly $15 on the first 4. It's slightly worse, but not that much worse. But then on the final one, we'll have a massive blowout. We will buy I can't remember, my maths is bloody awful. So what's that, $53 wine for the end. What he said is, look, when people go even to a 3 Michelin star restaurant, they are not expecting a Grand Cru Burgundy in a wine pairing, but that's what he would serve. And it was that moment of delight put at the end that stuck in people's mind. So this man who created the best restaurant in the world, known for hospitality, he is applying the peak end rule again and again and again.
So it's
All
better
moments
to
not equal.
find like to deliver like a peak experience during the whole experience. So you would rather have like a, let's say I don't know, 0 to 10, maybe like 5 experience, and then reach a peak of 9, than not have an overall experience of 7, maybe, right?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. And then the second parts, that would be making sure you plan for peaks. Don't do all things quite well. Accept a sacrifice on many areas so that you can fund that peak. And then the second part is ideally put the peak at the end. He
Okay.
finished on the Grand Cru. He didn't have it in the middle, didn't have it in the beginning. He finished on that fantastic wine.
I want to open my wine bar at some point, so I will probably use this.
Wow.
The end, I think
Yeah.
if you give like a great dessert wine at the end, you know what I mean, or like a free bottle at the end, I think it's a good way to kind of build a peak at the end, right? So it's
Yeah.
interesting.
You've
Yeah.
got Will Gadara doing this at the world's greatest restaurant. Now, you go to your local curry house and they know this as well. The best restaurant owners, they're entrepreneurs at heart. They know
Sure.
once the bill's gone, once the bill's been settled, that is the moment you can impress the customer. Because if you give them my spirit, it probably wouldn't be a limoncello with a curry, but if you give them a limoncello before the bill, people are like, wow, you're just trying to get a good tip. After the bill, you end on that high and that will be remembered and that will be respected.
I think another one was the habit formation. What do you mean for that?
So an awful lot of our behavior is habitual. Now, we talked right at the beginning about this idea that people don't want to waste energy on deep thought. They want to make quick decisions. And one of the quickest decisions is in a situation you've been in before just to do the same thing. So habits are your friend as a marketer. If you have a customer behaving the way that you want, that's brilliant. If they're behaving habitually, they'll keep on doing that until they hit an opposing force. But if someone is not behaving in the way that you want and they have a habit of purchasing another brand or a habit of buying your cheapest offering, you've got a massive problem because how do you persuade that person to change when they're not even weighing up the alternatives? They are just unthinkingly repeating the behavior again and again. So behavioral science helps in all sorts of ways. It helps in identifying when existing habits are weakened, and therefore that's when you should target your communications if you want to change someone's behavior. So there's all sorts of ideas here. There's ideas like 9 enders, We are open to change our behavior at the turn of a decade, like when our age ends in 9. There's the fresh start effect. We are most likely to change our behavior at the beginning of new time periods. It's like after a birthday, beginning of the month, beginning of the year. And then there are studies around, well, how do you create that new habit? And one
Yeah.
of the most interesting is the idea that you cannot, or you're unlikely to build a habit through motivation alone. So if you want to get someone to get a habit of buying chocolate, just creating an amazing chocolate bar is not enough. What you need to do is associate the consumption of your product with
Create
a very
moment.
clear, time, place, or mood. That's the what they would a psychologist call a trigger. So if you're Kit Kat, you don't just create an amazing bar and tell people it tastes
You
lovely. You
create
say,
break.
have a break, have a Kit Kat. You fuse the idea of consumption with a very clear moment. So there's all sorts of wonderful work about habits by behavioral scientists.
I think it's creating an habit is powerful. I think it's very hard though. Like it's very hard to create an habit on your consumers.
Yeah, I think you're really spot on to be emphasizing it is hard. Behavioral science is a magic. You can't use one of these biases and then suddenly think people are going to blindly do whatever you say. But what they do is give you the best probability of success. Yes, behavior change is hard, but you are more likely to change someone's behavior if you base your marketing interventions on peer-reviewed studies that have been shown again and again and again to show genuine insights into human nature.
And then probably the last one is extremeness aversion. What do you mean for that? People don't like extremes.
So this is a phrase that was coined by Amos Tversky back in 1993. And he did a simple set of studies, shows people 2 cameras. So a basic camera for, say, $100 and a fancy camera for $200. And there was a rough 50-50 split in what people picked. He then gets a new group of people, same original 2 cameras. Remember, they were a 1-to-1 ratio. But then he introduced a third camera, super premium camera, $400. Now, not many people pick that super premium camera. It's about 20-odd%. But what's interesting is the remaining 2 original cameras are no longer bought in a 1-to-1 ratio. You get this massive shift towards the middle camera. Even though the price hasn't changed, the relative price, the relative benefits, but you get a 3-to-1 preference for the middle camera now. Tversky's argument is often when we are posed with 3 options, we have a very simple rule: pick the middle one, because we think the most expensive will be overpriced. We think the cheapest will be poor quality. So you as a marketer can apply that. If you ever have a situation in which you have a basic product and a premium product, and you want more people to buy the premium product, the simplest thing you can do is introduce a super premium, really expensive product. Because if you introduce a $400 camera, the middle $200 camera is now positioned as a $200 saving. It's not a £100 premium, it's a $200 saving.
Yeah,
So
and I
even
think
if you never sold
Apple
a
does
single
it
$400,
very well, right? If you see Apple with the headphones, right? The big ones, they cost a fortune, but they make the AirPods Pro look like cheaper, right? So the AirPods Pro at some point were probably the most expensive, but then the moment they build, the bigger ones, by the way, they cost like double, I think, something like that. They make the AirPods Pro look like cheap ones, right? So actually, people then want to buy them. Yeah, no, it's
absolutely.
yeah,
We do not judge what we're prepared to pay by thinking, okay, I've got
yeah,
this product and it's going to give me 5 unit of happiness, and
yeah,
they're charging $5. That's quite a good deal. We don't think like that because it's complex. What we do is, or we're always comparing prices. That's much, much quicker. So,
yeah.
so introducing that super premium option you were just saying then, its role is to make everything else comparatively look better value. So you've got to be very, very careful of how you interpret your sales data. Doesn't matter if that super premium one sells anything. It's about the holistic product range. It's about, does it get the next most expensive thing sold in greater volume?
Richard, thank you so much for that. I think
Thank you.
before the end, I usually ask a question to my guests, which is, What's your definition of success? We live in a world where, success can mean a lot of things. For some people means, I don't know, becoming billionaires or simply millionaires. Or on the other side, for some people, it's just like, go fishing or
Yeah.
just, backpacking around the world. What's your definition of success? How do you define success? Yeah.
Well, for most of my career, like 15, 17, 18 years, whatever it was, I worked in an agency. And then I set up my own company applying behavioural science to marketing problems. And I've bloody loved it. That's probably the single best work decision I ever made. And the two things that I love about that, so this is, what I would say is what I particularly enjoy, what I value is control. So you can take on your own projects, you're kind of master of your own fate to a degree rather than being told what to do by someone else. And then secondly, variety. I, I love that variety. That's what enthuses me and keeps me excited. It's not necessarily one brief is more interesting than another, but I love going from, trying to encourage people to get. So I had a week where I went from encouraging people to get SDI tests to then going off and working for a spirits company and jumping around from brief to brief. I think just keeps things exciting. So variety and control would be my watchwords for a successful work career. Well, obviously there's so much outside of work, but I think those are the
What
two things
about
that I value.
life? What's your definition of success in life in
Well,
general?
I think that's a much more personal thing.
Complex.
But I mean, the danger is like on a day-to-day basis, what keeps me happy is often an interesting work project. But in a way, that's, I think, a slight mirage because what, experience, I can remember COVID with, families getting ill and things, you do realize that what seems like the priority and success in the moment, when something meaningful about health changes, then that all just drops away. So if I'm really honest, it's I suppose being around people you love and them being healthy and yourself being healthy.
Richard, thank you so much
Oh,
for accepting the
fantastic.
invite. That was
Yeah,
a great
loved it.
time with you. Hopefully, we will meet in person soon in London. But yeah, cheers
I hope
to
so.
success and cheers to your
Yes.
work.
Cheers. Yeah. And here's to Guinness 00.